Good go.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have breaking coverage coming straight across the pond from Australia. We have solarminimum.net Giles on location. As in the U.S., we are receiving reports that thousands of Australian residents were trapped on a beach as wildfires raged and the morning sky turned to pitch black. And Giles was in the region. Now, this was actually yesterday, so we're getting the news late. Can you break it down and tell us what happened?
Yeah, so I actually wasn't that close. My sister was a lot closer. She and her husband were down in an area called Eden, which is in the far southeast corner of the state, which is right near Malakuta. Now, Malakuta is where the fire pushed a whole sack of holidaymakers down to the beachfront at Malakuta, and what they had to do is they were about half an hour to 45 minutes away from having to actually go into the water to get away from the residual heat. So, but as they were seeing the cloud mass building and getting closer, and there were leaves and there was the bark and everything was falling from the sky, all burnt, ash everywhere. The wind changed direction from behind them, and it literally was a cold breeze coming off the ocean, and it just pushed it away and saved all 4,500 people on the beach.
That's just amazing. So it was like you said, it was the hand of God saving these people, or else they would have had to swim. So what else is happening in your region, and what should we be looking for?
Okay, so I've been posting a whole stack of stuff on my Facebook today around the fires that are individually starting across the state. Now, there are a whole stack that are actually now starting to create their own weather. And there was a scanner message sent out to all the fire brigades in the Nowra region, which is on the southeast coast behind me here, about 100 kilometres away. And they were told that the weather was going to be so extreme that they would have fire tornadoes, microbursts, and that the fire was going to start creating its own enormous weather. So they've now started to evacuate large tracts of area around the back of the city of Nowra, and it's actually now jumped onto the HMAS Albatross Air Force Base down there as well. So they've got a lot of things going on their hands. There's also another 5 fires that are within 100 kilometres of my area here at the moment, and at the moment I only have 2 roads out now. So previously I would normally have 4 or 5, and now I only have two ways to get out. So I'm keeping a very close eye on all of the lightning strikes that are occurring in the region, because there are the occasional rumbles going on, and with that big wind change, all of the flanks of those fires are going to start pushing it up to the north here towards me. But I'm still fairly well prepared here, and I've been getting around this afternoon and watering everything and making sure that I've got my green zone going. And yeah, it's what you got to do when there's lots of fire around, mate.
So you had some water come in there after the blazes started a week ago. How much rain fell, and is the ground still moist in certain areas?
No, it was 2 millimeters of rain, so it was like a quarter of an inch. It was nothing, or less, in fact. It was so little that it really didn't wet the ground that much at all. There is some rain forecast for Monday next week and Tuesday next week, which should be enough to put these fires out. But that will be the first decent rain that I will have had in about 51 days. So it's been very dry here. Normally during December, I'd get anywhere between 80 and 100 millimeters of rain. And January, I'd normally get between 90 and 140. So, it's definitely following the drought pattern against some of the records that I've seen for back in the 1800s. It's almost a mirror of the centennial drought for us here in Australia, almost a mirror.
Now, we're listening to some amazing reports that regardless of the fire danger, regardless of the loss of life and the loss of homes and the loss of structures, regardless of all that, because they spent money on the fireworks in Sydney, they're going to go ahead and blow them off anyway, regardless of the threat of more bushfires. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, to me, the fireworks are in the centre of the city. They're over the Sydney Harbour itself. So all the fireworks will fall over the city and over the water, effectively. So you could consider them safe. There's not going to be any wind for that tonight. I still think they're crazy because the whole visible thing for people here in Australia is that so much of the country is suffering with fire, and yet they're going out of their way to create more. And there's a little bit of a craziness to some of the politicians at the moment that we've got to do it for all the international visitors. And you see on the news there are tens of thousands of people still storming into all the locations on the harbour side to try and get the best seating for it. So it hasn't deterred anyone. Sydney will make its money out of it. And I think that's pretty much why they've done it, is to make sure that the economy of Sydney continues on.
So God forbid that the storm should shift and that the fire should move back towards Sydney and that the people will be trapped when they're trying to leave, or anything can happen. There is no way to predict what will happen. Just like the 4,000 people on the beach all thought that they were about to swim when luckily the winds shifted. What are your thoughts?
Exactly. And the chances are that the fireworks tonight are going to be shit anyway, because there's going to be a huge amount of smoke that's going to settle into the Sydney Basin this afternoon as the air cools. And so they're going to be pushing off these fireworks into clouds of smoke, and then it's going to look terrible. But, fires are something that we're pretty used to here in Australia, and as you are and many Californians are. I think the worst thing that I'm actually seeing, Diamond, is that there's huge amounts of people being caught lighting the fires. It's now down to, I think, in the last 12 months, they've now got down to 15% have started by lightning. The rest have all been started by people doing stupid things or people being malicious. There's been a bunch of people who have been camping through various different spots down the mountain range here who haven't been putting their little campfires properly. And, they're just stupid.
I pointed this out about 6 months ago, Giles, that not over 90% of all the fires that are being caused by climate change are actually being caused by careless idiots. And then I also uncovered some documents from Australia that most of the bushfires, 100% of all the bushfires in the 3 months leading up to this fire were human caused, and they have that man in custody. So there is clearly, this is not climate change related. It is malicious idiots that are lighting these fires on purpose, and to the tune of millions of dollars, the lives and livelihoods of people. And more importantly, they're actually twisting the minds of those that have already been twisted with the climate change narrative to believe that somehow this is everyone's fault and not just one bad actor.
Yeah, and one of the things that a whole bunch of us are trying to do is we're trying to keep the narrative straight and clean and on the narrow. There's been a couple of interesting little articles that we've found recently which show that there was a bunch of green protesters that prevented hazard reduction burns in September of 2019 in the same area which caused that big fire for those 5,000 people in the East Gippsland region of Victoria. So there's a whole stack of good politicians, and there's a whole stack of bad politicians that are all fighting each other all over this fire issue, and they're saying it's climate change, it's not climate change, it is climate change. And it's like, oh, grow up. It's common sense, it's a drought.
So let me get this right. The left-wing radicals, the Democrats, the Democrats over in Australia are preventing fires from being from controlled burns from happening, just like is happening in California, which is leading to loss of life and loss of structures.
Correct. And, we've lost over, I think, based on the numbers that I counted today, there's now 1,300 houses that have been lost. And so if you equate that through the value of Australian houses and then the additional sheds, machinery, and all their equipment, that's we're in the billions now of losses. The amount of farming areas that have gone offline now because of this is tremendous. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of hectares of land that fringe most of these natural forests that are used for small farms, and a lot of those are offline now. So there's dairies going offline, small vegetable producers, small cattle and sheep producers are all being heavily impacted by all of this fire.
So only 1,300 structures. That really pales in comparison to some bigger fires we've had here, where up to 10,000 houses have been lost. But still, the population is affected, and
we're tiny.
And the fires are more vast in your region, and it's a little different there because you don't have quite the overstory. Can you explain the type of forest and the type of actual bushfire that's happening there? Because it's more like a desert fire where it can spread rapidly, but there's not a lot of wood to burn, so it quickly moves.
What I'll do is I'll walk into that forest and I'll show you. It's probably the easiest way to explain it, because the forests that are all burning at the moment are all very similar to my forest here. And so you're looking at a very dense crown, which has got a huge amount of fuel on it. But then when you look at the ground level, you've got a very low level amount of fuel. So you can see around here, I've done all this burning off in preparation during winter, so it's all nice and clear. But when you get down to the bush itself, all of the lower story is highly flammable. But then there's a big gap to the top. In other parts, it can be quite dense, and you can literally hardly walk through it. So it's a very variable thing, but most of the forests that are burning are all very similar to this type of landscape. So the crown, being eucalypt, is all highly flammable. It has a huge amount of oil in it, and we have a whole stack of varieties that are even more flammable, like this one, which is a peppermint gum, and they're full of oil. They used to actually boil the leaves for these to make eucalyptus oil. Other plants like these ones here, the Garcinia, is fireproof, and so you actually try and plant more of these. The acacia melanoxylon, like this one here, is fireproof as well. And so I'm trying to grow these along the western side of my property. So it's a really diverse landscape, but the fact is that when it's bone dry like it is at the moment, nothing's fireproof. Everything burns.
So when the understory burns, and the top of the eucalyptus burns, do the eucalyptus trees regrow in the spring?
Yeah, they do. So basically, the eucalypts are evergreen, so they don't drop their leaves. They continually drop leaves all year round. And so you continually get huge amounts of this bark and leaf material. Now, this is only 6 to 12 months worth. So you've got a continual amount of mulch falling on the ground. Now, during wet years, you can get an inch or 2 inches of soil made in 2 years quite easily. But then as soon as you get into a dry season, you've got to push it all away from your house. You have to get it away. So you end up having to move all the mulch away. And so they continually drop all this fuel continually year round. And when the fires get into the lower story, if they can jump to the top of the tree, they create a crown fire. And the crown fires are the ones that move supremely fast. Now, a big fire down to the south near Tumbarumba, which is on the back of the Snowy Mountains, it moved 900 kilometres last night, in a long strip because of the wind that was blowing it. And it was crowning all the way through the tops of the crowns of the trees. It hardly burnt the ground at all. So, yeah, it's a fairly different set of fuel to what you've got. It's a lot of these eucalypts in California now, I believe.
So you got 7.5 hours till New Year's, and I want to say Happy New Year's and all the best to you and your family. And we don't start celebrating that for at least, even on the East Coast, for 24 more hours. So it's a pleasure talking to you as always, Giles. Keep the faith. stay wet and stay not lit on fire.
I'm going to be looking at, and happy New Year to yourself and Leah. Really, I hope you can share some of that cool wet rain that you're getting over in the States with us fairly soon.
Yeah, well, hopefully the rain will get there on Monday, and our prayers are with you and everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us. We love you. Check out Giles at solarminimum.net. Check out CF Jingara on YouTube. I'm going to have all the links below. You better subscribe now. We love you, CF.
Love you, Diamond. Cheers, mate.
Be safe. That's boom.